Hello, everyone. I'm Natasha Sumner, an attorney in Husch Blackwell's Healthcare Education and Life Sciences Unit and co-founder, co-leader of our Psychedelics and Emerging Therapies practice group. Before we begin, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console, there are multiple application icons for your use during the program today. If you have any questions during the webcast, please submit via the question box. We are going to try to answer questions during the webcast today, but if a fuller answer is needed or we run out of time, which may be likely because we have a lot to cover today, it will be answered later via email. A PDF of the presentation is available in the program materials folder. This program has been approved for legal education hours. To report your hours, click on the CEU icon at the bottom of the screen. A certificate of attendance, including course numbers, will be emailed to you tomorrow along with a recording of the webcast for watching and sharing. Toward the end of the program, be sure to complete our short survey. We use your feedback to plan future programs that are applicable to your business needs. So presenting with me today is Kimberly Chu. The other party who is going to present with us today, Karen Luong, could not make it, but they are both also the co-founders and co-leaders of our Psychedelic and Emerging Therapies practice group, and Kim Chu practices in healthcare regulatory along with myself. All right, so that is it for all of the housekeeping items. So let's get started with our program. So today we are going to be talking about emerging trends in clinical research, including things like decentralized trials, AI and machine learning advancements, and the integration of real-world evidence, as well as how these developments translate to the challenging arena of Schedule I psychedelic research. We will also explore adaptive and biomarker-driven trial designs and focus on diversity and ethical considerations, which are critical components for ensuring that Schedule I trials are as inclusive and comprehensive as possible. So we're going to start with decentralized trials. So what is a decentralized trial? Well, a decentralized trial is where some or all trial-related activities occur at locations other than traditional clinical trial sites. So places that are often used are healthcare facilities and often participants' home. And the reason that the decentralized trials are important is that they have the potential to expand access to a more diverse patient population and improve trial efficiencies, which also means trial cost. The Food and Drug Omnibus Reform Act of 2022, which is also referred to as FDORA, requires the FDA to issue guidance on decentralized clinical trials, providing recommendations on these different aspects here. So decentralized trials and Schedule I drugs. So what we're trying to do here is enhance accessibility and reduce barriers for patients. And of course, with Schedule I drugs, you always have a little bit more of a regulatory challenge. And of course, we have advancements in telemedicine and remote monitoring, which has the potential to revolutionize, that's very hard to say, trials. But of course, there are advantages and drawbacks when reconciling the controlled nature of Schedule I substances with the decentralized trial approach. So the FDA has issued draft guidance on decentralized trials, and they have, in that guidance, they have addressed a number of different things, which I have here, which we'll go through now. So trial design is the first one. So trial design, so always having a central physical location where records are kept and where trial personnel can be interviewed is important. And then the issue of non-inferiority versus superior trial. So a non-inferiority trial is a study that determines if a new treatment is not worse than an active treatment it's being compared to. And a superiority trial is a randomized controlled trial that compares a new treatment to an existing treatment or placebo to determine if the new treatment is better. So the variability and precision of the data obtained in a decentralized trial may differ, which could affect the validity of a finding of non-inferiority. So for example, when the effect size of an active control drug has only been determined in a traditional site-based clinical trial, it may not be reasonable to assume that the same effect size would be seen for the active control drug in a decentralized trial, which of course could present challenges in calculating a non-inferiority margin. And just so for those of you that don't know, an effect size is a statistical calculation that can be used to compare the efficacy of different agents by quantifying the size of the difference between the treatments. So remote trial visits. So a protocol should specify when a telehealth versus an in-person visit is appropriate. Visits can be conducted by trial personnel or healthcare practitioners who are located close to the trial participant's home but are not part of the trial personnel. The services by the healthcare practitioner should not require a detailed knowledge of the protocol. The protocol should describe how care will be provided for adverse events that require urgent or in-person attendance. And the trial personnel and participants should be trained on how to conduct or participate in a telehealth visit. And protocol should specify again how adverse events identified remotely will be evaluated and managed. That's really important. And it is the sponsor and investigator's responsibility to ensure that remote clinical trial visits conducted remotely comply with the laws governing telehealth. So there is, in terms of digital health technologies, there is a draft, FDA draft guidance right here, digital health technologies for remote data acquisition in clinical investigation. And these points here are some of the things that it discusses. So selection of the technology, the verification, validation, collecting data for clinical trial endpoints. Obviously, that's very, very important. Training on the use of digital health technology, and of course, risk management. And importantly, the digital health technologies must be available and suited for use by all of the trial participants. So sponsor role and responsibility. So coordinating the decentralized activities, bringing trial-related activities to the participant's home, including the use of that VHT that we just talked about. They reduce the need for travel and improve engagement, recruitment, and retention among potential participants with challenges accessing traditional clinical trial sites. And this will be important when I get to the discussion about diversity. The use of a local healthcare practitioner, as we just talked about it a minute ago, close to the participant's home can improve, again, engagement, recruitment, and retention of diverse participants. Another sponsor role and responsibility is the monitoring of the investigation, the data management plan, flow of data, methods used for the data acquisition, that kind of thing, implementation of trial operations, and then identifying when and where the data are collected and who is actually collecting the data. One of the things that, again, I'll mention it briefly when we talk about diversity and the requirements of diverse trial is the use of the local healthcare practitioner, which often can reduce things like cultural and linguistic barriers to participation, which is can potentially be a really big problem. The protocols should include scheduled and unscheduled clinical trial visits, remote and in person if applicable, transmission of reports on activities performed at different locations, delivery of IPs to the trial participant, if applicable, and accountability for the investigational product, the IP, and then safety and monitoring and management of adverse events. A trial monitoring plan should also describe how the monitoring will be implemented to assess protocol compliance and data quality and integrity, specify the frequency with which trial records and source documents will be reviewed, and note any unique aspects related to the decentralized trial procedures. The FDA encourages risk-based monitoring approaches and use of centralized monitoring to identify and proactively follow up on things like missing data, inconsistent data, data outliers, and protocol deviations that would obviously potentially render the trial unusable. Right, so we're going to talk about an investigator's role and responsibilities. So investigator can delegate trial-related activities to the local healthcare practitioner, making sure to enroll only as many trial participants as can be appropriately, managed, got cut off there, quality control, obtaining reports from the local healthcare facilities, that kind of thing. So when trial personnel contribute directly and significantly to the trial data, they should be included on the form FDA 1572 as sub-investigators. The local healthcare practitioners contracted to provide trial-related services that are part of routine clinical practice. So for instance, things like physical examinations, reading like an x-ray or something like that, obtaining vital signs, and where a detailed knowledge of the protocol, the investigational product, and the investigator's brochure should be listed on the FDA 1572. All clinical laboratory facilities must be listed on that same form or in the investigational plan for device studies. And then quality control measures should be in place to help reduce variability, including regular review by investigators of participant data entered by that local healthcare practitioner to assess consistency and completeness of the required procedures. The type and scope of quality control measures should be tailored to the criticality of the data and the complexity of procedures done by the local healthcare practitioner. So now we're going to talk a little bit about informed consent and IRB oversight. So for FDA regulations about informed consent, you can go to 21 CFR Part 50. And for additional information, there are guidances for IRBs, investigators, and sponsors. And then also use of electronic informed consent questions and answers from December of 2016. So when you have a decentralized trial, the informed consent process must include notifying participants of whom they are supposed to contact for answers to pertinent questions about research and research subjects' rights, and whom to contact in the event of a research-related injury to the subject. So, and FDA recommends the use of a central IRB. So for investigational products, the nature of the investigational product should be considered. Again, we're talking about decentralized trials here. Whether there's a complex administration, what is the safety profile, and then early stage, are we in early stages of development? What follow-up procedures are needed? If it's a medical device, things like the physical integrity and stability of the investigational product and shipping. Those are all things that need to be considered. An investigator must administer an investigational product only to participants under the investigator's personal supervision or under the supervision of a sub-investigator. Depending on the safety profile, sponsors should, and the type of trial, so like if it's a dose escalation trial, sponsors should estimate the urgency and complexity of care that may be needed based upon the risks related to the investigational product and the participants' underlying condition. and make sure that participants have access to appropriate level of local care, as we talked about with their healthcare practitioner in the area. There may be certain follow-up procedures after using, for instance, a medical device or after like a surgical implantation of a device. And that can be done by, appropriately qualified and trained local healthcare practitioners or trial personnel, maybe appropriately via telehealth or in person, could be at the home of the trial participant, or it could be in a local healthcare facility. A telehealth visit may be appropriate if an assessment in that setting doesn't pose significant risk to the trial participant and adverse events can be properly assessed and documented. The protocol should describe the physical integrity and stability of the investigational product and how it will be maintained during shipping to the trial participants, including appropriate packaging materials and methods. The decentralized trial personnel should be trained on procedures and appropriate documentation for the handling, packaging, shipping, and tracking of the investigational product. The protocol should describe procedures that investigators or participants should use to return or dispose of unused investigational product and how this will be documented. So there's a lot more to consider when you're talking about a decentralized trial, and particularly when you're talking about shipping a product to somebody's home. All right, so we're going to talk about safety monitoring plan. So safety monitoring plan. Adverse events must be appropriately captured and adequately addressed. I think we all know that, but it's always important to mention again. Again, pre-specify telehealth visits or in-person visits. Describe the information collected by the DHT. Discontinue remote administration or use if needed. Make sure that there is a plan in there for that. And then the routine safety monitoring, and that includes things like laboratory and testing. The sponsor is required to ensure proper monitoring of the investigations and to ensure that the investigations are conducted in accordance with the general investigational plan and protocols contained in the IND or IDE applications. Trial participants must be able to contact trial personnel to report adverse events and to have pertinent questions answered, as we talked about previously. And then trial participants should be able to arrange for unscheduled visits, and that could be telehealth, that could be in person. Software can be used to perform multiple functions when we're talking about decentralized trials. Here's some of them: managing electronic informed consents, case report forms, capturing and storing reports, scheduling trial visits, that's an important one, obviously, tracking products that are shipped to the participants, and then communication. Training should be provided to all of the parties. So don't assume somebody knows how to do something, right? How to use any of the different things that might be used in a decentralized trial. So that includes trial personnel, obviously, even the local healthcare practitioner, and of course the participants. So just make sure that they are trained on all the software. If the local practitioner has access to eCRF, they can enter trial-related data directly into it. Alternatively, the local healthcare practitioner can upload forms or documents using, of course, methods of secure data transfer to investigators. Remote trial personnel or the local healthcare practitioner that's submitting the trial data directly into the eCRF should be included in the sponsor's list of authorized data originators. So again, really important to make sure that, depending on the level that the healthcare practitioner is involved with this particular trial, that they may need to be included in different forms. The live interactions are not considered electronic records and therefore are not subject to 21 CFR Part 11, but local laws governing telehealth may apply. Also, privacy and security of real-time visits should be ensured, and the visits must be documented. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about diversity. The diversity in clinical trials. So The fedora that I mentioned earlier, section 3601 says, with respect to clinical investigation of a new drug that is a phase 3 study, or as appropriate, under a pivotal study of a new drug, the sponsor of such drug shall submit to the secretary a diversity action plan. So I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes and what that is and what are the components of that. So the FDA guidance documents define a diverse population to be inclusive of all populations as defined by demographic factors such as race, ethnicity, sex, gender identity, age, pregnancy status, lactation status, and by the presence of certain clinical characteristics such as multiple comorbidities. And so as we have, diversity encompasses demographic and clinical characteristics. That's important. Medical products should be developed in a study population that is representative of the population for which the medical product is intended. And again, that is important and will be required in the diversity plan. All right, so why is this important? So I put a couple of facts here because I think this points out why diversity is so important. So, of course, clinical trials are the foundation for the approval of new drugs. So between 2011 and 2017, over 80% of trial participants, this is in the US, were white. Between 2015 and 2019, 79% of US trial participants were under the age of 65. That was actually really surprising to me. 2015 to 2019, only 2% of trial participants were Asian. And you can see the other numbers here, 16% African-American, 3% other, 4% American Indian or Alaska Native. Those are really, really, really small numbers. So here's where it becomes really important, where you can see. From 2015 to 2019, cardiovascular disease was a leading area of clinical research, just across the board. In 2019, African Americans were 30% more likely to die from heart disease than non-Hispanic whites. But of course, as I said, from 2011 to 2017, over 80% of trial participants were white. So you can see the problem here. From 2006 to 2020, the FDA approved 24 new molecular entity drugs for 7 cardiovascular conditions. For Black residents in the US, the percentage of clinical trial participation, I can't talk today, was 2.9%. So, diversity in clinical research, trial design. So we want to design with inclusivity in mind, ensuring that individuals from diverse backgrounds have an equal opportunity to participate. So some of the factors here that are important are language barriers, cultural sensitivities, and accessibility. And so you want to design your trial protocols and recruitment strategies with all of these in mind. Community engagement. So when you engage with a diverse community early, that's where you can build trust and collaboration and things to address those barriers. There may be communities, I know there are communities that have issues with trust, and rightfully so when it comes to clinical research. And there are ways that you could establish a partnership with, I don't know, community organizations or advocacy groups. And by raising awareness about the trial, you can get some feedback from the folks that you want in that trial, which could really help in terms of your recruitment efforts. This is a big one, and I know we hear a lot about this just more generally outside of even the clinical research areas, cultural competency. It isn't just an added skill set. It really is an essential framework. So I think everybody should really take to heart and really kind of figure out what this means for them in terms of how do I learn about cultural competency. And so it really, when you have this cultural competency, it allows you to engage with these diverse participants. And, you become, there's sort of a sensitivity to cultural norms, beliefs, and preferences. And so by kind of expanding your knowledge about different cultures, you can improve communication, and really, most importantly, is to retain the participants that you want, in your trial. Language accessibility is another one. Oftentimes, if you want to have a diverse, if you are wanting diverse populations to, enter into your trials, you need to understand that some of them, English may not be their first language, and so trying to figure out, how to communicate with the different trial participants. So things you can do is, use a translation service, which is often very, very helpful. And I think making sure that there's awareness around the fact that that will need to be used upfront, and then using those, again, culturally appropriate communication strategies will be really important, both in terms of getting folks into your trials, but also keeping them, in your trials. And you really want to make sure, this is really important for things like informed consent, being able to communicate with them throughout the trial, being able to communicate about things like adverse events. This is a really, really, really important piece. And so, implementing these proactive recruitment strategies, as we talked about, you want to target the diverse population. So who is that population? Where are they? Addressing those barriers to participation. Is it a language barrier? Is it a trust issue? And then again, talking about those recruitment channels, so community outreach, social media could be a really good one, and healthcare settings is another one, and then patient registration. And then ethical considerations, I mentioned this before, the informed consent process, making sure that there is an understanding of everything that is going to be going on out the clinical trial. What are the safety issues potentially with the drug, things like side effects and that sort of thing, and making sure that the participant understands everything in that informed consent. Again, equitable distribution, we talked about that earlier. And then this is going to be particularly important when you're working with kind of a vulnerable or marginalized population. All right, so I mentioned diversity plan. These are kind of the basics elements of a diversity plan. Now I drafted this before the draft guidance came out yesterday. So I have a little bit more guidance, but just, generally speaking, disease overview, scope of clinical development, and then the enrollment goals and actions to enroll and retain participants. But I'm going to go through in a little bit more detail here. Okay, so yesterday the FDA came out with a draft guidance on the diversity action plan. So the stakeholders are not eagerly awaiting recommendations. So we now have at least a draft guidance here. So I'm just going to very briefly go through, because we are getting very close to me having to hand this over to my colleagues. So some of the contents for the diversity action plan. So the first thing you need to do is have the goals for your enrollment, and it needs to be disaggregated, it will not be surprising, by race, ethnicity, sex, and age group of the clinically relevant study population. So some of the things that were mentioned in this guidance, it's about 20 pages or so long. So again, this is just a very kind of cursory overview, but you can use appropriate available public resources, and you can also potentially use non-public resources to obtain like prevalence or incidence of disease across the affected population, again, by race, ethnicity, sex, and age groups. Now, FDA does recognize the lack of uniformity across the globe in the use of population descriptors such as race and ethnicity. So I think this is going to be a little bit of a fluid issue until there's something a little bit more concrete about how to deal with that, these descriptors. So that's number one, goals for enrollment. Number two, the sponsor has to then talk about the rationale for their goals. So describing the data and information that suggests a potential for differential safety and effectiveness across the clinically relevant population. So things like pharmacokinetics or pharmacodynamics, what the body does to the drug or what the drug does to the body. Those can have different effects depending on things such as race, ethnicity, age, sex. And then the third thing is the explanation of how the sponsor intends to meet such goals. And that includes things like enrollment and retention strategies that we just talked about. And the guidance does have an example at the very end, so it's worthwhile to check it out. The guidance also discusses the timeline and the procedures for submitting the diversity of action planner. All right, so I'm at time. So I'm gonna go ahead and pass this over to my colleague, Kim Chu, who's going to talk about all sorts of other interesting things.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kimberly Chu. I'm gonna be covering the first section about artificial intelligence. Actually was authored by Karen Luong, who regrets not being able to join us because of her litigation schedule. But it has, just to go back to artificial intelligence, it has taken the world by storm, including clinical trial design. So many folks on the call might be aware of the high costs associated with clinical trials and the time constraints, as a single trial can span well over a decade. So this can really impact things like recruitment and retention. Astonishingly, 80% of trials experience delays, which is pretty critical for preserving the trial's validity. And data management of the clinical trial also is challenging, especially with regards to adhering to privacy laws, which are different in all the different states, as well as in the EU and all the different areas of the world where clinical trials are being run. Regulatory hurdles also pose a significant barrier with complex rules that vary by region and affects the trial's progress. So these challenges have been demanding innovation to enhance the speed and effectiveness of clinical trials. So here comes AI being used in clinical trial design to enhance efficiency. It's been basically revolutionizing clinical trial design. And the idea is also to help improve accuracy of your clinical trial data. So things like predictive analytics can forecast trial outcomes, and personalized medicine approaches can tailor treatments in individual patients, and hopefully increasing the likelihood of success, which is what we all want for our clinical trials. So, what is AI? AI refers to the simulation of human intelligent processes by machines, particularly computer systems. So the key types of AI technologies include machine learning, or ML, natural language processing, which is shortened as NLP, and computer vision, CV. So I'll be covering each of these topics in turn in the subsequent slides. But these technologies enable machines to learn from data, understand human language, and interpret visual information. So by leveraging these advanced technologies, clinical trials can become more efficient, accurate, and more patient-centric, and hopefully ultimately accelerating the development of new treatments and improving patient outcomes. So first up is machine learning, or ML. So at its core, ML is about teaching computers to learn from data. So imagine you have a massive data set, like millions of images of dogs and cats. And instead of manually coding rules to differentiate between the two, you can feed that data into an algorithm. And the algorithm, through a process known as training, identifies patterns and can make predictions. So you can think of ML as like the engine of a car. It's powerful, but needs fuel, in this case, data, in order to run. And that the more data you provide, the better it performs. But it's not just about quantity of data. Quality of matter also matters. So high quality, diverse data leads to more accurate models. And in the context of a clinical trial, machine learning can be deployed to analyze electronic health records, identify patients who most likely benefit from the treatment, predict patient outcomes, detect anomalies, and even monitor patient data in real time to help with early detection and risk issues. Next up is natural language processing, or NLP. This is the technology that allows machines to understand and generate human language. So it powers the likes of Siri and Alexa, chatbots, and translation tools. So NLP lets a chatbot interpret your questions, detect your emotions, summarize text, and create original content, which is essentially giving computers a grasp of human nuances. So on this slide, we see NLP's practical uses. In literature review, it scans and condenses scientific papers. And for reporting adverse events, NLP can extract critical data from clinical narratives. So it gauges treatment efficacy and side effects by analyzing patient feedback. And it ensures trial protocols adhere to regulation standards, and basically all automatically. So it's our linguistic bridge, transforming reams of text into insightful and actionable data. So we're going to switch gears to computer vision, also known as CV. This tech provides machines with the ability to interpret visual data, essentially seeing as humans do, but with greater analytical capabilities. So CV is at the heart of revolutionary applications such as facial recognition and autonomous vehicles. So if you take autonomous vehicles, self-driving cars, using CV, they process visual information and navigate safely and independently, well, hopefully, as we'll see in the news. So, but within healthcare, CV's impact is profound as it accurately analyzes medical images, improves diagnosis, patient stratification, and progress tracking, which is crucial in clinical trials. So one example I've seen of CV that I was personally impressed by in the psychedelic realm. So this is a company called Cacti that uses, they're actually looking to second generation psychedelics. And their model is to, a lot of folks in the psychedelics realm, when they do research, are looking at animal models to look for safety and efficacy. So one of the things that they have developed is they use CV to actually film and record and have the AI count the number of times a rat will do a particular behavior. And I saw a film of this, it was quite impressive. So it's basically transforming all kinds of things in clinical trials, such as anything from, animal modeling and remote patient monitoring, analyzing your data from wearables, gauging health metrics, and using telemedicine to evaluate patient outcomes over time. So in essence, it's reshaping clinical trials and enhancing precision and centering patient experiences, which hopefully drive, to quicker advancements in treatment and care within the realm of clinical trials. So regulatory compliance is another area where AI can make a significant impact. AI tools can ensure adherence to trial protocols, automate reporting and documentation processes, and enhance transparency and traceability, which would hopefully make it easier to meet regulatory requirements. So the FDA has issued 2 useful discussion papers to address the use of AI in clinical trials. One of them is up here on the slide, and it's entitled Using Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning in the Development of Drug and Biological Products. So this publication is available on FDA's website, and it covers things like the current and potential uses of AI and machine learning in drug discovery, non-clinical research, clinical research, and post-market safety surveillance, excuse me. It also sets out some overarching standards and practices for the use of AI and machine learning, and discusses some considerations and best practices. We don't have time to do a deep dive into the specifics of this guidance, but just be aware that it exists and you should refer to it. On October 30th, 2023, President Biden issued an executive order addressing the promise of AI and managing its risks. So it establishes safety for establishes standards for AI safety and security, protecting Americans' privacy, advancing equity and civil rights, protecting consumers and workers, promoting innovation and competition, and advancing American leadership around the world. So for example, on the equity and civil rights issue, the executive order addresses the use of AI algorithms to exacerbate discrimination, including in the justice system, where AI has the potential to aid, but also to hurt vulnerable populations. As many of you may know, AI was used in the development of the COVID-19 vaccine. And so in the race against COVID-19, the recent pandemic, it was a game changer in the development of the vaccine. So the AI algorithms were used to rapidly model the virus's proteins, and it just accelerated drug discovery. In clinical trial design, AI was used to sift through health records to pinpoint ideal candidates for the vaccine, and it allowed adaptive trial adjustments, which I'm going to cover later on in this presentation. And it integrated just multitudes of data, which aid in the rapid, informed decision-making in this development of this vaccine. So remote monitoring was also helpful. That is, AI was used in remote monitoring, especially in the context of the pandemic. It minimized in-person visits and used natural language processing to track adverse events and compliance issues. Also, post-approval, AI was used for surveillance and through real-world data, which again we'll be covering later on in this slide set, and allowing the AI platforms to facilitate knowledge that was, to facilitate knowledge that was shared among researchers around the globe. So it basically set a new benchmark for pandemic response and really showed the world how quickly a drug can be developed with the use of AI. So next we're diving into an increasingly vital aspect of healthcare, which is real-world evidence. So real-world evidence, let's just define it what we mean by that. In its simplest terms, we're referring to any valuable insights that you gain about medical products from data collected outside of the confines of a traditional clinical trial. So this is where, in the real world, where patients live their real lives. Real-world data is actually what forms the basis of real-world evidence, or RWE, and it's gathered from a variety of sources, which include electronic health records, which are commonly seen in our hospital setting. So there's also insurance health claims data, which they can sift through, AI can sift through, and which could reveal treatment patterns across different cross-sections of patient populations. So it also includes data that comes directly from patients through home use settings, like such things as mobile devices and apps that are designed to track health-related metrics. So real-world evidence studies have been used to explore different aspects in health and disease, such as epidemiology, safety, and patient-reported outcomes, such as patient satisfaction and quality of life. So clinical trials do not always reflect the diversity and complexities of real-life patient populations. So real-world evidence, or RWE, fills these gaps, which gives clinicians a clearer picture of how treatments work across diverse groups in varied healthcare settings. So, how can you use this information? Implementing real-world evidence in the early stages of drug development can potentially result in shorter duration of trials and cost savings, hopefully. It can also be pivotal for monitoring the safety of treatments post-approval and can help clinicians tailor therapies to individual needs of their patients. So what's the impact of all this? With real-world evidence, you're able to make better informed healthcare decisions, ultimately. That's the whole goal of its endeavor. So you can enhance personalization of patient care and ultimately improve outcomes for patients. So to summarize, real-world evidence allows us to understand not just whether treatments can work, but how they work in the real world, which is often such a different scenario from the controlled environment of a clinical trial. So the digital advances for enhanced patient outcomes is something real world evidence is being used for. So the digital age equips us with advanced tech such as wearables and apps that do more than monitor. They really, to the clinicians who are analyzing the data, they unlock deep insights into health patterns. So these devices collect detailed data while ensuring safety, which is far different than what's been traditionally done. So predictive algorithms could revolutionize patient selection, streamlining the trials with precision. This digital innovation enhances scientific pursuit, offering deeper insights into mental health treatments that have been previously unexplored. So in terms of real-world evidence and Schedule I drugs, Schedule I drug trials present their own unique challenges. Schedule I drugs, as probably many folks on the call know, they're tightly regulated. So the utilization of real-world evidence in this context might seem less applicable because the regulations are so stringent, and the availability of these drugs within a clinical trial setting are more limited. So, but when you shift to post-market surveillance, real-world evidence can become crucial. So it has the potential to play a pivotal role in elucidating long-term efficacies and patient outcomes, which could provide crucial insights for healthcare providers, patients, and policymakers once that Schedule I drug actually becomes approved. So after approval is when real-world evidence might especially be pertinent for treatments that target chronic or severe conditions such as PTSD, anxiety, or depression, which are indications being targeted by many Schedule I researchers. This potential promises to revolutionize Schedule I drug trials, anchoring them in patient-centric care that's holistic, precise, and transformative. So last August, the FDA finalized some guidelines for using real-world data and real-world evidence in drug development. These guidelines are crucial for sponsors in planning and executing interventional studies. Key takeaways include the necessity for sponsors to collaborate early with FDA, particularly when choosing non-randomized controls over randomized trials. And the rationale for data source selection must also be cleared and justified. So transparency with the regulatory agency is critical. Not only must sponsors detail their statistical analysis and data submission plan in order to meet FDA standards, they also need to publicly share protocols and the basis for data inclusion or exclusion. Next, we're going to cover some aspects of trial design that might be implicated in Schedule I clinical trials, such as adaptive trial design and the use of biomarkers. So adaptive trial design revolutionizes clinical trials with unmatched flexibility. It allows for real-time protocol adjustments that are based on interim data. So imagine dynamically changing dosages, sample sizes, or even concluding a trial early if the results justify it. So this is not only efficient, saving time and resources, but it's flexible. So adapting quickly to new insights and potentially reducing risks to your participants in the clinical trial. What's on the slide here are the FDA 2019 guidelines, which bolstered this approach, the adaptive trial design approach, and it outlines 7 crucial adaptive design elements. So with these in place, the researchers are steering towards a future where medical breakthroughs are realized more swiftly and efficiently. So adaptive trial design is indeed a smarter, more fluid path to success within the realm of clinical research. So in Schedule I clinical trials, adaptive trial design can play an important role. As data unfolds over the course of research, revealing new layers of safety and efficacy, adaptive design allows us to refine dosages, enrollment criteria, and clinical trial endpoints. So this iterative evolution is data-driven, with precise modification upholding the trial's integrity. So conducting trials with Schedule I drugs requires strict adherence to regulatory standards. We must ensure our adaptive moves are both scientifically valid as well as regulation compliant. So partnering with your regulatory authority would be critical in these endeavors, ensuring transparency as well as safeguarding participant safety and ethical standards. So in essence, while adaptive trial design presents certain complexity within the context of Schedule 1 clinical trials, it's also a promising route. Okay, next we're going to be covering biomarker-driven trials and biomarker-driven approaches to your clinical trial. So imagine navigating the waters of a Schedule 1 drug trial with a compass, a biomarker. These biomarkers are biological indicators that offer a path towards precision medicine. And the biomarkers must be thoroughly vetted for reliability and in predicting treatment responses and potential risks, especially within the tightly controlled realm of Schedule 1 substances. So this exploration dives deep into a substance's pharmacodynamics and pharmacokinetics, demanding both clinical insight and a granular understanding of these treatments and mechanisms of action. Biomarkers are revolutionizing clinical trials, particularly within the emerging field of psychedelic research for mental health disorders. As researchers, you're tracing biomarkers to unlock how psychedelics can rewire dysregulated neural pathways and foster therapeutic outcomes. They're the biochemical fingerprints that could redefine precision medicine. So with patient stratification, biomarkers can help pinpoint individuals who would benefit most from psychedelic therapies. And by utilizing AI and machine learning, researchers can sift through the data, tailoring treatments to each patient's biological signature, that is with these biomarkers, and potentially transforming mental health care. So with these biomarker-driven trials, it's a refined approach, and it has the potential to enable researchers to pinpoint specific subgroups for whom psychedelic treatments can be effective. It could guide dose selection, which would reduce the guesswork and enhance safety for participants. It can optimize outcomes by foreseeing how individuals might respond to a given treatment. And it could predict the likelihood of adverse events, allowing preemptive safety measures for participants. Biomarkers are basically steering researchers towards a new era of personalized medicine, even at the clinical trial level. As you might imagine, there's a lot of regulatory considerations at the heart of these biomarker-driven clinical trials. So in order to qualify a biomarker, it has to pass through a gauntlet of regulatory validation. And this means a thorough demonstration of its analytical and clinical validity through robust validation studies. The validation process is collaborative, where CDER, Biomarker Qualification Program, works with the requesters to guide biomarker development. And under the 21st Century Cures Act, biomarker qualification involves a 3-stage submission process to develop a biomarker for regulatory use. The FDA makes a decision to accept or not accept, and this decision is communicated to the requester in a letter that includes feedback and recommendations for further biomarker development. During this process, there are opportunities for requesters to work collaboratively with CDER in order to address the aspects of the developing of a biomarker. The assay testing for biomarkers are also pretty critical, and they undergo an analytical validation as well, where the assay should be consistently and reliably, it should be a consistent and reliable assay in order to measure the biomarker. So, and then after following a rigorous assay, you also have to do clinical validation for your biomarker, and that's where clinical studies are used to connect the dots between the biomarker and actual clinical outcomes. So as we turn to our next slide, let's discuss the transformative impact of AI within the field of scientific research, particularly in the identification and utilization of biomarkers. So AI is being used to sift through mountains of research papers and clinical data and genetic information. They're being used to analyze complex patterns and extract meaningful insights at a speed and scale unattainable by traditional methods. This capability is what has been accelerating the identification of new biomarkers for different indications. So at a recent biotech convention, it was announced that an AI was being used to mine all of the publicly available scientific data. And that data set was estimated to be valued at approximately $2 trillion. So by integrating this vast array of publicly available data, that AI has the potential to uncover correlations and causalities that would otherwise go unnoticed. So biomarkers are being used to overcome traditional barriers in research, and it's hoped that through the identification of appropriate biomarkers, that researchers will be able to pinpoint subtle yet significant effects of new treatments, differentiate between merely psychoactive and genuinely therapeutic treatments, pave a clearer path for psychedelic studies in general. So this promises to be transformative for Schedule I related clinical trials, which historically have been difficult to study due to stringent legal requirements and basically the inherently difficult nature of neuropsychiatric studies. With reliable biomarkers, researchers will be able to provide objective, data-driven arguments to regulatory bodies, compelling them to reevaluate these classifications of Schedule I substances. In summary, biomarkers may very well be the lighthouse that brings forth a new era in which Schedule I substances are approved and reclassified and utilized to their full medical potential. And with that, that is the end of our presentation. And I think we have a few minutes for, oh, we're almost out of time. I apologize. I think, do we have any, I don't even know if we have any questions.
I do have one, we have two questions actually in the Q&A. So one of the questions is, should nurses who perform study activities on subjects at home be listed on Form 1572? The answer to that is probably. It really depends on what that nurse is doing. So when you say perform study activities, what it sounds like to me is that they are doing procedures related to the protocol, maybe even data collection. So if they're doing something along those lines, then yes. If they're just performing like ancillary services, here and there, that's probably don't need to list them on there.
Very good. I see that another question talks about, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Kim.
I was going to say another question asks about whether diversity excludes religion. And you might know this better than I do, Natasha. I thought the 2022 guidance did include considerations for religion.
Well, I think that in terms of diversity for the Diversity Action Plan, religion is not listed. That doesn't mean it's not important generally, but I think what they're looking for here are the things that are relevant specifically to getting populations who traditionally have not been included in research to get them into clinical studies. So religion, for example, is in Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act, which is the non-discrimination. So religion is very important. It's just not included here. Again, I don't know exactly the FDA's thinking in this, but I surmise that that's probably the reason for that. So it looks like we're at the end here. So just, any other questions that folks have, drop them in the Q&A, and then we will email you a response. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope that this was informative and helpful to you and your organization. And just as a reminder, the program has been approved for legal education hours. So to report your hours, click on the CEU icon at the bottom of the screen. A certificate of attendance, including course numbers, will be emailed to you tomorrow, along with a recording of the webcast for watching and sharing. And then please, again, be sure to complete our short survey. We use your feedback to plan future programs that are applicable to your business needs. This concludes our webinar. Thank you.